Hi, this is Steve Gillmor, and this is an abbreviated version of the Gillmor Gang. We had some technical difficulties, and it was all because my younger, is it smarter brother, Dan? How does that work?
You're my older, wiser brother.
Okay, so yeah, you're my younger, smarter brother. I made a promise to Dan that if he got this exciting new job, which he did, that I would have him on the show. And in his first articles for this publication, of course, he came out with a series of obnoxious statements about Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg. So I thought I'd bring in Mark's best friend, Robert Scoble, and and some other people to try and keep us from getting into a fist fight virtually. So first of all, Dan Gillmor, welcome to the Gillmor Gang.
It's great to be with you. It's I should point out it's a part-time job with Salon, but a lot of fun.
What is it? You're a columnist there now?
I'm doing a column on media and technology, and particularly where those two things intersect.
Okay. And also joining us, as I mentioned, Robert Scoble.
Hey, glad to be on the show.
And Kevin Marks. Not hearing you, Kevin. Are you muted, Kevin? Snake bit again. Well, Kevin, you may have made some sort of change in your audio, and while you're trying to figure that out, let me introduce Chris Messina from Google.
Hi, I believe I'm still here.
Yes, I believe we all are. Kevin, just sort of raise your hand when you feel like you actually got audio working again. Nope. Okay. Let's turn it over to Robert Scoble. You were at Mark Zuckerberg's most recent apology, but you weren't at the meltdown at All Things D, right? Where do you think we stand right now with this whole thing?
I'm starting to turn on Zuckerberg, and I'm starting to, Shell Israel read a really interesting post about that he should step down and go do something else, run R&D or be a chairman or something like that, and let somebody who is better in front of the public, do the public stuff. Have Sheryl Sandberg get on stage. She's a lot better than he is, and it's tough because I like Mark, but he's doing himself harm now. I think anyways, that's where I'm turning now. I think he's had his chance to try to step up his game and explain what he's doing and try to regain people's trust in him, but it's not working.
Dan, you want to comment? And also, I think you may be breathing into your headset. Can you move the mic down a little bit?
Okay, I'll try and move it out of the way here. I don't think it's about whether he sweats buckets and is incoherent for part of an appearance at a big conference, though that obviously doesn't help him. The issue is what he does. It's not what he says. It's what Facebook does, not what Facebook says. And I'm not convinced by the evidence that what they do is something I care to support.
Chris, what do you think?
Well, the way that I would frame this, first of all, it's up to Mark to figure out how to run Facebook, and so I can't have a strong opinion on exactly that. However,
well, you can have an opinion, you just don't want to say it, right?
Well, what I would say is that I think the whole privacy thing is definitely a very, very challenging issue. I'm learning this, and I think a lot of people at Google are learning a lot about this area, but I think that they've actually made a considerable number of changes in light of the response that they got. The template-based privacy settings are, I think, an interesting approach, and it does simplify things in some respects. I was actually having a conversation about this yesterday with some folks, and it turns out that there are actually, I think, something like 29 different types of permissions that you can ask for as a developer in order to get very fine-grained access to different parts of a Facebook user's account. And the fact that they offer that, I think, is significant. The issue, of course, is how do you present 29 different categories and classes of information to people in a way that's coherent and doesn't just get in their way like some terms of service. So from my perspective, that's one of the fundamental challenges that we have. Now, in terms of running the company, again, that's not something that I have a whole lot of experience with personally. I've run a small company, but not a company like that.
Kevin?
I think what we've seen with Facebook is they're moving closer to the open standards world, and some of the recent hires they've done there has shown that, as well as some of the recent actions. But there's continual confusion between openness that's on the user's behalf and openness that's of value to Facebook. And this is where the tension reveals itself, because some of the sort of mental models of how people behave are very narrow and very sort of built around because they're a young company and a bunch of young guys designing this. They don't necessarily have a mental model for everyone else who's using it too. And they have some of the same problems that Google has there, which is they're very prone to be focused on the data and the modeling and not on the emotional reaction of people to what they do. Whereas a big part of social is emotional, and that is the problem that they're going to keep bumping into.
Well, when you say that a big part of social is emotional, as social technology moves into the enterprise, is that still going to be true?
I think that's going to be true there too. Yeah, the emotional reaction to what happens is important. I mean, in a sense that was Cheryl's point, which is we just had a really bad emotional reaction to Mark Zuckerberg, therefore he shouldn't be running the company. I'm not sure that's necessarily a sensible thing to do, but emotion is a part of business too. And if you look at the difference between Jobs and Zuckerberg, there was a very strong emotional response to a lot of the things Jobs said, but it was clear that he had an idea for the business, and that there was an emotional reaction there, and people feel more comfortable about the lot of the things he's doing than they do about Facebook, even though they both have challenges in the open as well.
Well, I'm not sure. Dan, would you agree that you feel more comfortable about what Jobs is doing than what Zuckerberg is?
Well, they're in different arenas. They're both doing things that are both terrific and terrifying. So, I don't like a lot of the direction that Apple is going, though I continue to think they make great stuff. And I very much dislike the closed ecosystem that Apple is creating. And I really don't have any opinion on whether Zuckerberg should be the CEO of Facebook. He is young, and he could still easily become a very good CEO in every sense. But there's just a lot of stuff that they're doing that feels to me like pushing boundaries that they may think is great for the world in general and great for Facebook, but that I don't think in reality is good for the world in general. And in the end, we may have to make a choice.
Well, I know you won't agree with this statement, but isn't that a little paternalistic to be concerned about people's choices? I mean, as people, stampede to try and buy an iPad every 3 seconds, what exactly who are you trying to save from themselves here?
I'm actually not trying to save anybody from actual choice. I'm trying to, if possible, encourage there to be more choices. And I've been saying repeatedly that Apple has every right to create this PG Disneyland of an ecosystem, but that the people, I think in particular, who should not be participating there are people like journalists who should not hand over control of what they do to a PG ecosystem. But if people want to live in that, that's certainly their choice. I would hope that people would choose to live in the real world, not in the Disney world.
Robert, you want to talk about this?
Somebody
has
idea
to,
of a
because I'm gonna go
federated
nuts.
Facebook. The idea of a federated Facebook is interesting, but I think is tangential to what's going on at Facebook.
Not to mention science fiction.
Well, it's science fiction because we don't have a system that has all of our friends on a federated system. We don't even have really a good federated system yet, right? Diaspora or whatever they call themselves has $200,000 in the bank right now, but they haven't built what they've promised. And there's other open systems being built, but they don't do what Facebook does. And they don't have my friends on Facebook and my wife's friends and the 500 million people in it. Until you figure out that, you're not going to have a good competitor. I think it's off topic though. Right now we're trying. Facebook is changing yet again, and they've done it 5 times, right? They used to be a network just for Harvard students, and then they became a network for college students overall, and all the Harvard students got up in arms. And then they opened up and became a network for everybody, and all the college kids. I remember this. We had violent arguments. Damn it, Facebook is for college kids. It's not for adults. It's not for normal people. It's not for business people. It's for college kids. Why is Facebook opening up? And then they turned on the app platform, right? And all of a sudden everybody was getting spammed with all these apps, and everybody got up in arms again. And then the next year, Facebook turned on the news feed, and there was 1 million people who protested against the news feed. Ben Parr started that page. People were up in arms about that. Now it's about privacy. They're opening up the social graph a little bit so that we can search for each other. I mean, come on. This is a company under intense change, and we're trying to figure out what Facebook is, and do we trust this company? And that's why I don't think Zuckerberg should be in front of the public anymore. I think they need somebody like Sheryl Sandberg or somebody with a softer face who's trustworthy. We don't trust Mark because he's changed 5 times in the last 5 years.
Chris,
we don't trust them because they keep changing the rules that they had established previously.
Exactly.
It's not about whether it's Mark Zuckerberg or Sheryl Sandberg. She's part of the executive team that is making these changes, and
I know, but
again,
Facebook now is moving from something that we put our little family photos in and we talk chit chat about, our college parties or our Friday night parties, and we chit chat back and forth, to being infrastructure that our businesses run on. And if you're asking me to run my business on Facebook, that needs a different trust contract than if I'm just putting my little drunken Friday night party photos.
Well, I don't think that we're asking Facebook to run our businesses.
Oh, absolutely, we are. Facebook is, Facebook. The world is moving.
Well,
to Facebook.
I don't care what Facebook thinks. I'm talking about.
Look at
I'm not asking.
Answers.com, which is the 18th largest website. They're putting Facebook like buttons.
Look, I understand what you just said. I just don't agree with you. I don't think that because Facebook thinks that they're moving into the enterprise, which I don't think that they think yet, it doesn't mean that Facebook, are going to be the enterprise player. I mean, I'm an employee of a company that is likely to be a significant enterprise player, and so is Chris, and so is everybody on this call for that matter. Yeah. What I'm saying is that wait a minute, Robert. What I'm saying is that the technology, the utility, and the fluid viral nature of social media is moving into the enterprise. Whether it's what Zuckerberg thinks or not, or whether he sweats too much or not, I think is completely orthogonal to the issue.
Well, I think that's very true. I think we're seeing that with the open social stuff has very strong contributions from IBM and from others that are building enterprise software, because they're seeing that the model there of being able to embed an application within a page and have the application understand the context of the page is a powerful thing, and that's something I've been watching for a while. And it was very interesting to go to the open social anniversary a couple of weeks ago and see how much of the focus was around enterprise stuff now.
So why do we trust Mark Benioff and we don't trust Mark Zuckerberg? Mark Benioff has never taken stuff that we thought was private and put it into public view. He hasn't messed with our idea of privacy yet. And unfortunately, Mark Zuckerberg is the public face of Facebook, and he hasn't explained why he did that well. And he continues not to be able to sell his ideas to people. And it is an emotional thing. We trust Steve Jobs, even when he does something nasty, because he's good at selling us on a dream and taking us someplace.
Yeah,
right? So when he takes away Flash from the world, we buy into it because
we buy into it because he knows what he's doing and he's right, and he's got the control to be able to do it.
He's also good at
the biggest
selling
problem
stuff.
Zuckerberg has is that he's backed off several times from a perfectly reasonable, perspective. I mean, just because there are people like Dan Gillmor who are afraid of the terrifying implications of people getting to do what they want to do, doesn't mean that that Zuckerberg's perspective that privacy is in the throes of changing as people have come on the network, and through the the initiative of Twitter in particular, learned how to start to speak publicly in a private way. I mean, that's a transition that Facebook is having to grapple with, just like everybody else is. You want to stand up for yourself there, Dan?
Well, I don't know where to start. Twitter is entirely public. On
Not
Twitter,
true.
you,
DMs are not public.
No, that's not true. You
but
can't.
DMs are actually, and if
The
Twitter
graph is
were
public,
to say
but DMs and some accounts are private.
Facebook email is DM. I mean, there's the same thing. I mean, what's the difference? You can do an IM on Facebook too.
The difference is that Twitter has not systematically made more public things that were designed as private, and Facebook has. That's one difference. Another is that Twitter is not aiming to be to become the default identity for everybody on the
that's
web.
ludicrous.
It's a whole lot
That's
of
not
other-
true.
That's not only is that ludicrous, it's also an invention of the media. I mean, who the hell did Mark Zuckerberg say, we're going to take over identity starting today with our fabulous Trojan horse like button? We're going to dominate
No, but no, they
the
say
world. I mean,
we
come
have
on.
real identity, everyone else has personas. That's something they've said in public many times.
Yeah, and so is Google has said. I mean, Google owns
Google
my
has said that.
persona, lock, stock, and barrel. Since I've been pouring every piece of information that I've ever generated into Gmail now since the beginning of the service. I mean,
Well, I haven't.
Well, I know that you're very resolute in your concern about this, which I don't criticize you for, but I do question.
Sure, you do.
No, I question your ideas, not you personally.
Well,
Okay, so what I'm
and
saying
then
is
useful.
that I don't find it terrifying that a service that is now at 500 million and counting is somehow pulling the wool over people's eyes in this mass hallucination designed to steal their identity from them and then sell it back to them at some point. I think that's ludicrous.
That's not what I said.
No. The point is they have a narrow model of identity. Mark Zuckerberg said if you have more than one identity, then that's a sign of lack of integrity. They've assumed that their social graph is an accurate model of everyone's relationships with everyone, and proceed
Yeah, but I
on
mean,
that
since
basis.
when do you listen to CEOs of companies to let you know what you think about something? I mean, I think that
that's
the
not- no,
Twitter
I'm talking
the
about
Twitter
what they
social
think about
graph is
something.
infinitely more powerful because it's an intricate
I'm not
series
arguing
of
with you.
overlapping follows,
Saying-
which
yeah,
is
yeah.
much more powerful with much smaller numbers of people involved.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so as far as I'm concerned, I've just identified Gmail and Twitter as owning more of my identity than Facebook will ever.
Right, but the challenge of the protocol stuff and the stuff that Chris and I have been working on for a while is trying to come up with ways of doing this that doesn't assume a single central point. And the challenge that what we've seen with the Facebook-like stuff with the Twitter out anywhere is the assumption that you can use one of these as your only source of identity, and that's the only thing you should put on the site. The difficulty is when you have many sources of identity, when you have many overlapping personas, how do you get people to sign up for the site without filling the screen with millions of buttons? And Chris gave a good talk about this week at what's the conference you're at, Chris?
Open Source Bridge.
Open Source Bridge. That talks about the issues here of trying to say, how do we let people make an informed choice about which identity they want to use in a particular place? How do we bridge those together in ways that doesn't surprise and shock them by breaching their privacy compartments that they've decided to use different sites or different pieces of sites for?
I think there's so many pieces of this conversation to unpack, and we've talked about these things before on the show. I think that on the one hand, what's sort of worth bringing up, and what Robert's talking about, is the idea that when you change the rules of an environment like Facebook, people's expectations become confused. And so they're sort of grappling with what they had as a previous mental model for how things worked, and then that changes beneath them because, for various reasons, to solve a large number of people's concerns or desires. And not everybody, of course, wanted or desired those changes. Of course, we know that humans are somewhat, resistant to change. There's the talk that I gave this week actually was on activity theory, and activity theory is kind of useful to help us understand these things, but because essentially it describes a way that an individual operates within a community or a space. They take on various roles, and they sort of rely on and trust the rules not to shift too much. And if those rules change in a way that they don't understand or are not transparent to them, then now they feel like their role and the way that they interact in that space is now up in question. And so I think these changes that have happened over time have been so abrupt and have not been gradual and haven't been opt-in in a way that's not very consistent, that it creates a lot of consternation for folks who are sort of in the space just to connect with their friends. So while Facebook is making, I think, strides in their platform and simplifying things in a lot of respects, it creates a lot of tension for a lot of different people who have different expectations and use the service in different ways. And I think from a design perspective and from a product perspective, it's extremely challenging to have started out with this kind of great network that was designed for a certain type of sharing, realizing that certain people wanted it to move in a different direction, needing to meet those needs in order to continue growing the platform, and then finding that there was resistance along the way from various folks who used it. The biggest challenge, I think, with where things are at and what Kevin and I and a lot of folks have been working on, including Dave Burkorden, who happens to be sitting next to me, is giving people sort of an escape valve to leave if they really want to, and doing it in a way that is actually meaningful. I mean, one of the promises of data portability is that you should have a choice of multiple providers. I can take my money out of a bank account and put it into another bank, and I can still spend that money. But the reality is that I can't take my data out of a number of these services today, move it into a new service, and not lose connections with my friends. I think,
and that's a really tough thing to do, right? If you let's just take something very specific and simple out of Facebook, like a photo. How do you take all the tags that were done on that photo? How do you take all the comments underneath that photo? How do you take the likes out of that out of Facebook and put them on somewhere else and have them make any sense and still have that value of all that behavior around the photo? It's a really tough problem. But I get back to Jay Morris in the chat room says maybe Zuckerberg can't explain what they've done well simply because what they've done isn't any good. And I think that's the heart of this. He hasn't explained where Facebook is going very well. He's not selling us on what.
I'm sorry, but
not
we're
so sure
making
about
this
that.
up as we go along. Everybody in this space, whatever you want to call the interest in or application of technology, we are developing systems that we're learning about. I mean, when the founding fathers sat down, they had certain historical, references on which to base some of their arguments, and they were all patriots, as it turned out, but they also had violent disagreements about what was going on. And the thing that I find, I think that the conversation and the argument is completely valid. What I don't necessarily think is valid is the assumption that the market forces, which I believe are inevitable arbiters of some of these things aren't going to come in and basically say, if it, like what you just said, Robert, which is that he hasn't explained what they're doing. Okay, why are they continuing to grow?
Because there's a network effect here that if you want to know my wife and me, you got to be on the system. That's why it continues to grow.
Okay, so in other words, there continue to be new people, many of whom, as a result of the media outcry about this, are well aware that allegedly Mark is not trustworthy, yet they overlook that, or they look at it and say, okay, well, that's interesting. I'm going to assume that anything that I put on the network is always going to be public, which I think everybody should assume. And they're going to move ahead, and they're going to find best practices and results on the network that are going to tend to move to the lowest, or the largest amount of people who care the least about these issues. Now, Dan, that may be a problem for you, that a lot of these decisions are being made by people who don't really think that the issue is all that relevant to them. But aren't they going to make that decision?
If people want to make that decision, and they make it on an informed basis, and where they recognize that there may be some problems with this down the road, I'm willing to, I'm not going to try and stop anybody from making informed decisions. In fact, the more informed they are, in general, the better decisions they'll make. What I think has happened, and what I think Facebook needs to do much more than it has done, is to explain to people exactly what it's doing, and to give much more, much simpler and easier to use kinds of choices. And if people decide to, open up completely, that's their business.
Chris, you're shaking your head. In some cases, they'll regret. Can we put Dan and Chris on? Hang on one second. Can we put Dan and Chris on the screen? Okay. Chris, can you resume shaking your head?
I'm very sympathetic to the points that Dan's making, but in practice, I guess I kind of want to know more specifically what he's talking about, because on the one hand, he wants Facebook to be more articulate about what they're doing, and yet still provide simple controls and simple user experiences for what are actually very nuanced and very humanly squishy kinds of interactions. For example, the way that I trust someone in certain contexts varies greatly depending on whether or not I've had 3 or 4 drinks, for example. And software is not so great about dealing with those types of interactions and decisions. So on the one hand, there's that side of it, which is how do we actually provide better user experiences that help people make clear decisions so that they can act in context without having to think about it, without throwing up some terms of service style interface in front of every decision that they make. And then on the other hand, in terms of the clarity of what they're talking about, I do feel like Facebook has in some ways articulated a vision, Zuckerberg in particular, about sort of this open, more transparent world. And currently, I think that there's a bit of an imbalance in terms of how people are internalizing that, that is, people who use Facebook, because that idea doesn't quite resonate with them yet. This idea of open and transparency is still a very foreign type of experience. The benefits aren't exactly clear when they're going there to just interact and engage with their friends and family.
And he, Zuckerberg isn't open and transparent completely either. We don't have a video camera
he knows how to use
in his
the tools.
Conference room, right? He knows how to use the tools, but he understands that we're moving into a new world where we have a different set of privacy choices to make. He's trying. The problem is, again, he's trying to take us into a different world that Twitter is really pushing us into, which is we have an open social graph, and we can search for people based on our social graphs. And he
but the
needs
expectations
to
in Twitter started out entirely in a different place. And so when you signed up for Twitter, you understood that was news, that was public. And even as you pointed out, as Facebook has changed some of the fundamental assumptions. Now, there's also a lot of, I think, unfair, immediate reactions that people hear about in the media, which then transcend a lot of their experiences. So Facebook actually gives you a good deal of control over sharing your private data. However, it takes a good deal of work to go in and actually set those settings. I think Buzz suffered from a sort of similar experience when it first launched, and there was a lot of impressions that were formed very early on, which were corrected actually very quickly, and people still have the perception that it's a public by default, and it makes all this information public in the same way that Facebook did.
I think it perspires much too heavily, Buzz.
Excuse me?
It sweats too much.
Clearly, it's not fit to be a CEO.
So where do we go with this conversation? Because
I know where we're going to go. We're going to go straight to hell. But on the way, Dan, you want to say what you were grappling with saying?
I guess what I'm getting at, and Chris is right, that there's enormous amounts of nuance and granularity in how we as individuals relate to other individuals in various parts of our lives, starting at home and extending, to the place where we drink with people, and that actually does change with a couple of drinks, and on and on and on to the workplace and elsewhere. But in general, I think that the right rule for these things should be opt-in at every step. And if people opt in, fine.
But isn't it always opt-in? I mean,
no,
nobody's standing over your shoulder and saying, "Okay, click there now."
Facebook was not opt-in on this latest on the F8.
What are you talking about?
I did not ever
people
see your
who think
Pandora
that
music
when they go
until
on,
they turned on that new feature that lets me see all your Pandora music. I knew you liked the Beatles, but now I really know.
What's that about?
It proves that he has.
I'm not on Pandora. I haven't been on Pandora in years.
I know, and that's probably the problem. Is if you're not using these tools,
I made
you
a
don't
decision
see what really happened to you. Pandora all of a sudden showed me all of my friend graph and all the music that they listened to on Pandora. That was a shift in how we see each other.
That was a shift in your understanding
of
how.
Opt into.
Of course you did. You opted into getting music, information from a service that you had no idea what their business model was, and neither did they for a long time.
I had no idea that they were going to share that with Facebook, and that Facebook, in some point in the future, would all of a sudden share it with my social graph. Now, I happen to really love that feature because I've found more music in the last 2 weeks or 4 weeks than I've found in probably the last year and a half, right? Because I can now click on
Now you're talking. So we're talking about this opt-in thing. So the question is whether you give a blanket opt-in that if you use computers and you go to a service which you imagine is somehow doing this out of the goodness of their heart for free, and they do something with that data, with the attention and gestures that you generate, that somehow that's a big shock to you, I would suggest don't turn that computer on again until you've figured out what's actually going on here with these machines.
Personally, I love this new world. I wish it was more public. I wish there wasn't any privacy. That let's live our lives in.
I know you're
Robert,
you're
we're
the
not
poster
like
child
you.
for this.
But look, so Steve, you're saying the default is assume you will be screwed. That feels wrong to me somehow.
Well, Scott McNeely said that a long time ago, and I agreed with him then. He said basically, privacy, get over it.
And it felt wrong then. It feels wrong now. That should not be.
That's because you're old. If you're 16, they don't care about this stuff.
But I'm older than he is.
Hell no.
He's still upset about
they have something they totally different that they care about, which is
they
want to know
that
they're talking to the real person that they're talking to. On the other hand, that they don't care that you see their music. They know they share their music in the freaking playground with each other.
We're talking.
They care who
music
sees what
is
they
a
post to
proxy for a
Facebook.
whole lot of other things here. Don't assume that young people don't have things that they want to keep private, because they do.
They absolutely do.
Yeah, young people are very good at keeping things private.
They're very
My
intentional.
daughter is on Facebook. In fact, the only thing she's on is Facebook. She's not on email. She tried to email something this morning, almost had a major crisis here because it didn't work. I mean, oh shit. And she's on Facebook, IM, Skype, and video conferencing, and that's her world.
Yeah.
All right, but do I know what she's doing at any moment? Hell no.
Do you really want to
she's
know?
got these multiple streams of information that she will go to. She'll be talking to somebody. I can hear her as I approach her door. I can hear her talking. As soon as the door opens, she's not talking anymore, but she's typing. She's got an IM channel that's open, so she knows how to navigate these systems so that she can keep her privacy and what's important, as Dan points out, about
Except by your standards, Steve, you're saying that she should expect at any moment that the services she uses will betray her. That's your standard, right?
I think that's probably what she thinks too. I mean, I think she's sophisticated enough to realize that these services are not free. These services are for the purpose of capturing and sustaining markets.
It's
and
possible.
She understands that.
It's possible to have a service that you offer for free and that is entirely opt-in at every step of the way, and which preserves people's rights to keep their information and to take it out. And
look, just hang on a second. I was a part of a group called the Attention Trust about 6 or 7 years ago, and we had a thesis which was we own our own data, right? And we basically did a land grab about that. We said, we got Tim O'Reilly and Esther Dyson to sit in the room and nod occasionally while we rolled out the recorder. And the idea was, if you really are concerned about this, then take your data and put it someplace that you control, and then you can give that to anybody that you want to. Doc Searles talks about VRM, the whole fundamental principle of controlling your own data and licensing it, in effect. He doesn't say this, but others do. Licensing it on the network. You could insert a packet into every header of every mouse click that you wanted that said something. And, Chris, you can argue with me about this, but I suggested this at a meeting at Reuters with a bunch of lawyers, and the lawyers all turned around and said, that's not such a bad idea. The question is whether we really want to take control of this thing that we call the rights to our data or not. And I don't think that there's any evidence of the fact that people want to do this. They would rather hand it off with a certain degree of flexibility, with the understanding that if there's more than one vendor, that there's a chance, as Dan points out, of choice about being able to move from one silo to another. But beyond that, I don't believe in this, federated fantasy that there's going to be somehow.
It was a federated fantasy when the Intention Trust started, because there wasn't any way to move stuff around. There weren't any specs for it. There wasn't any work there. What's happened since then has been a bunch of effort to try and do this, to provide OAuth so that we can
I agree.
You can selectively disclose stuff, whatever it happens to be. You can connect the pieces
Mark
together.
Hanner's efforts along those lines a couple of years ago, something that I think, Dan, you were asked to sign. I know I was. And my comment to them was, I already signed this. It's called the Attention Trust. I already agree with you. You're following in
well, the Attention
prior
Trust
art.
had too much of Seth's securitization of attention.
No, it
nonsense.
didn't. No, it didn't, because I was there to basically say, either you own your data or you don't. If you own it, here's a mechanism to do it. If you want another mechanism, go ahead. Knock yourself out. It was based on attention.xml, which was David Sifry and I sitting around and positing this question 6 years ago. Okay. Yeah. There's no magic to what we were
Steve,
doing then. All I'm saying is that the end result of watching other people grapple with this over the years is, I don't think people really care.
No, they don't.
I think people do care. It's not the problem is that it's really hard to do, and I think you're also, Steve, saying things that contradict each other in some ways. First, you're saying, given that it's really difficult, and that that they don't care.
You said it was difficult.
That it's
I didn't say it was difficult.
Well, we don't have this federated system that works.
I don't think federation is an answer. I think it's a fantasy.
Well, we'll disagree on that. But you're saying on one level that people have handed off this task to other people who have these web services, and then you say it because they think that that's the best way. But then you're saying in the same breath or a different breath that, by the way, those people will screw you at the
No,
first
I'm
opportunity.
saying
I don't think this is a good solution.
Excuse me, but I handed off all rights to the global archiving of my email, which turned out to be everything because I rapidly, as I got off of Office, I started putting all the documents that I was generating into Gmail as well. I handed that off to Google. Do I think that Google is somehow blessed with a do no evil badge that's going to secure this from any malfeasance at some point in the future? No. I just think it's a likely bet that between them and other people who, through the marketplace, hash out the value proposition and the messaging, to Robert's point, about what they consider to be important, that I'm going to get a reasonable degree of predictability about how these bits are going to be utilized. And I'm comfortable with that, especially since the alternative is to put it on a hard drive, which will, when it crashes, I lose everything.
Yeah, when was the last time you backed up your YouTube account?
Exactly. It's an extraordinary service, and it's worth.
I do because they keep deleting stuff. But that's
we pay taxes and send people to war to try and protect ourselves, and sometimes the Nixon will come along and threaten the very fiber of the republic. But does that mean that the government is a bad bet? I mean, I know the libertarians think so, but I'm not one of them.
And I think there's another aspect of this, which is figuring out the alternatives. And the thing that kind of drives me nuts about this conversation, because I don't necessarily disagree with you, Steve, but I think that the way that we go about bringing the change that some of us would like to offer to the marketplace hasn't been spelled out in very clear terms. So, for example, having done all this work on OpenID for the last couple of years, I can tell you that we started off putting privacy more or less sort of up front. That was one of the great design features of OpenID, is that you could actually sign up for a new service and not reveal anything about yourself. The problem is, of course, all these websites that you're signing up for, getting free services for, we're getting essentially nothing in exchange. And so Facebook and Twitter come along, they make it slightly easier to get a little more information about people, and boom, all of a sudden everyone's willing to rely on third parties for identity, right? Because there was actually a real kind of data portability that these services provided. So it kind of drives me nuts when we've been working on these technologies, building in privacy along the way, but we haven't actually been thinking about the sites that actually are relying on this data to function. And so unless we can actually bring about technologies and formats and protocols that make it easier for us to share more and more data, and then have those options where we want to share less information in certain contexts, then we're not going to make a whole lot of progress, and we're not offering solutions to the marketplace that
you don't think that your work has dramatically influenced these very players that you're concerned about?
I would hope that it has. I think that it's great to see a lot of adoption of things like OAuth and activity streams, and I think that we're getting there. But I guess when we talk about things like diaspora, which is this privacy-aware, do-it-all social network type of thing, I want to see that type of thing succeed. But I think it's very important that you don't go to the absolutes. It's not an all or nothing type of affair. You actually have to build in the interests of a number of different players and think about it from a systems perspective, and understand that Facebook is able to be as effective and as useful as it is through things like Facebook Connect because they offer value to publishers. If you don't consider that side of the value exchange and you're only thinking about the privacy side and what you're not offering, then you as a user are a less valuable user to the web.
So let's take this out of the hands of Facebook a little bit. And yesterday I wrote a guest post on TechCrunch, which was all about location and identity. We give stuff about our location to so many different silos. For instance, TripIt knows what planes I'm going to be on in the near future, and when I'm going to be on those planes, and what airports I'm flying back and forth to. I check in Foursquare at the airports, where I check in at my house, I check in at restaurants, I check in all over. But Foursquare doesn't know about TripIt, and TripIt doesn't know about Foursquare. And then I'm using Google Calendar and Tungle Me so that you can schedule me. My calendar has all sorts of location information. It tells it knows what location I'm going to be at Monday morning, where I'm going to be, how long I'm going to be there, and stuff like that. But it has no idea what Foursquare or what Facebook or what TripIt or what any of these other services are doing. When these services hook together, that's when we're going to really see a radical shift in our understanding of privacy, and we're going to ask for different things than we're asking about right now. And there's a network effect for participating in this system. You're going to get paid to participate in the system. Let me give you an example. I checked in at Foursquare at the top of the Heavenly Valley gondola on Saturday afternoon. And when I did that, there was a tip there that said if I had bought my ticket, I would have saved $6 if I bought my ticket at my hotel instead of at the front door of the gondola. I found out about that half an hour too late. But Foursquare, if it had hooked up to Trip or to Google Calendar and to my actual real location and to my hotel, could have warned me ahead of time that I should buy that ticket at my hotel, and I could have saved $6.
Dan, you were a co-founder of Doppler. What's your take on this?
On all of this, well, I should say Doppler actually had standards about privacy that were the kind, and about data that were the kind that I'd like to see more widely used, including everything being opt-in at every point, sharing only with people you designated as people you trusted. They could not share what you shared with them unless they just scraped it and posted it somewhere on the web without your permission. It took opt-in every step. And if people decided to leave the service, we would zip up every single scrap of information in a easily parsable file and send it to them before we deleted their account.
But that doesn't delete where the data is going elsewhere on the network. I mean, I'm not sure what the value of that is.
Well, it was portability in that case, and we certainly couldn't do anything with data that would be, if other people were already using it in their own calendars, there's nothing we could do about that. But
Dan,
data,
here's my point.
The point is that the people started using the Doppler API in pretty interesting ways, but never in ways that, unless someone had very specifically opted in, that could be used to do, for example, what happened when suddenly people with Pandora accounts found their stuff everywhere around the web because Facebook just and Pandora in a deal just turned it on. This is, again, I understand this is going to happen, Robert. I'm intrigued as hell by the knitting together, or at least the connection of these things together in ways that add new kinds of information that's useful to people. But I'm pretty adamant that what I want to see them do is to do it in a way that in every case people understand what's going to happen before they do it.
But here's the deal. I interviewed the guys who run Tungle Me. They're giving their users a choice, an opt-in choice of, do you want to share your calendar information to public, or do you want it to share it to private? Almost every single customer chooses the public option. And that's just with a calendar. What happens when the system flashes over and we have these systems that connect with each other, and there's actual real value in sharing your private lives publicly? For instance, why did Blippi happen today when it couldn't have happened 5 years ago, right? We are changing our ideas of what it is to do things in public view. I'm sharing my private health information on the internet right now, Robert, and I get a benefit from that. That was not true 10 years ago.
Well, Robert, what you get temporary value from may not prove over time. There may be some downsides to the immediate value. We have relatively cheap oil in the world still, but then again, you have a problem like what happened in the Gulf because oil is cheaper than perhaps it should be. We're not thinking about any kind of long-term consequences. And by the way, Kevin just posted a tweet that is really relevant to this conversation, which is that for all of the stuff that we're talking about, this pales next to what the data mongers, like people like credit bureaus, are doing entirely without our permissions. And
Well, and
entirely in more insidious ways. So we have a lot of work to do at a lot of levels to make this stuff
Well, but
right
you
for
you
everybody.
slough that off, but that's in fact true. I mean,
Yeah.
people have been selling, Comcast data for what is it, $6 a month per user to on the open market for forever.
Right. So I mean, the thing is, when people see this stuff in public, then they get upset about it, which is why we see bizarre stuff like protests against Google Street View in the UK when there are 50 surveillance cameras on every corner in the UK that are run by private organisations. That because you can't see the data, you don't worry about it in the same way. So once this stuff is revealed, then we start getting scared about it. And the point is, a lot of this data is being collected anyway, and it shouldn't be that the supermarket knows exactly what you purchased and you don't. The phone company knows who you've called and you don't. It shouldn't just be between these private agencies and the government sharing this information about you. You should be able to at least see the information about you and ideally correct it, control it, and relay it back. I mean, we're starting to see some interesting flips on the data, the government data stuff in the last few months, both from the US and the UK. The UK government today released their entire spending database, which is 128 gigabytes of data, which is so big they're distributing it over BitTorrent, precisely because they want more people to be able to look at it and inspect it. But in the same way, we can't get access to our own supermarket purchase records, yet the credit rating agencies have those.
I liked the answer that some people in San Francisco had for the supermarket cards, which was to meet up once a month, throw them all in a hat, and pick someone else's.
Okay. I want to diversify just slightly as we start to wind down. Is anybody as amazed as I am about Steve Ballmer's conversation to D yesterday?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I just found it, I mean, first of all, I've met the man several times, and he's brilliant. He has this kind of, aw shucks, I'm just the business guy kind of pose that he has. But the reality is that he's a stone-cold technologist. Anybody who worked day to day with Bill Gates for 30 years knows more about this than I'll ever know. But when he says that the iPad is just a PC, I mean, he's on drugs. That's my opinion. And I really, I mean, we're going to look back at this in let's see. They just sold another 4 of them in the time that I brought this up. The number of iPads that are going to proliferate in the marketplace, and whatever Google comes out with, let's say that at some point it will add up to 20% of the market. I'm waiting for the argument, Chris. Anytime you want to jump in.
It's pretty weird to see Ballmer basically declaring anything with a screen is a PC.
Well, if it was, then they've had a lot of iPads out there for quite a while. They just haven't been selling.
Well, it was peculiar. I mean, if Zuckerberg was a kind of incoherent salesman for his company, Ballmer was a completely coherent bad salesman for his company, because it made no sense.
Anybody else want to touch that one with a 10-foot pole?
What do you think he meant by PC? I mean, a PC is a personal computer, right? So as far as I'm concerned, the iPad is one of the most personal computers that's been made. So by
Absolutely.
definition, he was right.
Let's see.
But I understand what
10 hours of battery life. I mean, I got this Evo at Google I/O, and it's a fantastic device, especially when they turn on the video conferencing. Supposedly. The only problem is that every time I pick it up, almost all the battery's gone, and I'm not even using it.
That's too bad.
That's a cheap shot.
This is the great secret of the iPad. It's that big because it's a great big battery.
But that is not a secret.
It's a battery with a screen.
It's kind of
It's a battery with a screen.
yeah. So
I would love
it's a good bit of design.
I would love an EVO with a big ass battery on it. So
yeah, you could tape it to this.
Yeah, because that way you get Wi-Fi into the iPad and you get battery into the iPad.
I mean, look at this. It's like some sort of what do they call this? Here we go. The iPhone, the Evo, and the iPad.
Right.
Nice
So-
personal computers you have there.
is our stream back up? Because I saw the stream was down a
Tablet
little bit.
centipede.
Is it up again? Is it down? Sorry about that.
Well, so I can give you one more comment about this stuff if you're interested. I think the thing that I've been saying about this, and about the iPad and about the iPhone and about some more devices, and the Google TV as well, I think is that they're ushering in a new age of computing devices. That I guess another way of reframing PC is to think of it as pop computing, because our expectations, or I guess a certain generation who grows up using the iPad as their first computing device, is going to have very different expectations of what you can and should be able to do with one of these computing devices and how much you should be able to manipulate it. I started out with like an IBM PS2 with like 140 megabyte hard drive, maybe 4 megabytes of RAM. I mean, it was atrocious, but I could crash that thing. I could go into DOS. I could figure out how to like tweak various settings. My parents hated me for it, but at least I got a taste for what the insides and the guts of that machine were like. With the iPad, they've done a lot of work, of course, to really minimize your ability to break the thing. You just keep tapping all over the place. Something crashes, you hit the home button, and it's like reset. And you can do that over and over again, and you can just thrash as though it's like the Google search box. So I'm very interested and somewhat concerned about how that'll change. I think the kids growing up and going to school with their iPads, what their expectations are of how much control they should have over the computing devices that they have, and whether or not that's going to be a good thing, because it will mean that computing generally becomes somewhat safer, but it also means that it becomes more sterile in the Zittrain sense, where people just don't expect that they should be able to change things and that everyone else is managing this stuff for them. And so it's really not their problem anymore. And when we talk about data portability and all this privacy stuff, all of those decisions are going to be outsourced in such a way that the individual really doesn't have a lot of influence over those decisions. I hope that's not the case. I hope that things like open source and open hardware and stuff like that continue to grow in their interest. But that's
I don't
something
agree with
about.
the slippery slope argument that you're trying to make. The iPad fits into my computing experience. It doesn't obsolete my Mac.
Well, that's because you have expectations and because you have like
You're
8,000
a
devices.
geek, Robert.
If you're one of those
No,
people
that's
that
not true.
has
My
one or
son
two
knows if he
devices-
needs to edit a photo, he needs to use Photoshop if he really wants to do it
I mean,
right.
give me
And
a
that's not
break.
going to change anytime
There's
soon.
breeds like bytes.
Come on.
Like,
Xenophrenia was making this argument too that the everybody's idiotic and doesn't know anything.
No,
And
I don't think that's what
I
I'm
don't
saying.
look at the
Doesn't
world
look
that way. I mean, we all know we can go into Best Buy and buy a laptop. Give me a break.
The point is, it's about who gets to have control, right? The thing that Jobs was saying this week was, I reserve the right to kill things I don't like. He said,
okay, so we're gonna find a
proudly
way-
gloated about killing HyperCard.
You know
Which-
what? I already figured out how to do Flash on my iPad. I just call into my home computer, which has Flash on it, and I can get Flash. It's if we want to work around problems that these assholes put in front of us, we're going to figure out how to hack these devices and root them and
Yes,
jailbreak
but
them and get
the
around
point
them.
is that the open stuff means that one company going out of business, one company changing its mind, can't actually damage the ecosystem and prevent it for the rest of them. It stops you building it on a platform with one leg. That's the key difference between the web and
know,
what
A
Apple has
lot of
done
hey
with
Robert,
WebKit.
a lot of what people do today is the result of people who are anywhere from 20 years old to 40 right now, who grew up at a time when, and even younger, but who grew up at a time when programming was either easy or not super hard, and anybody could do it on devices like the iPad. If that's the thing they grow up with, They're not going to learn a lot about programming.
Oh, that's
And
ludicrous.
I think we're going to lose a certain amount of. I don't think.
Even if
You're
you're
talking
right,
about a
I don't have
1.0
carburetor
version.
in my car anymore. I can't change.
Steve Jobs-
I can't.
Steve Jobs
I
says
can't
that-
control the fuel
Steve
air
Jo-
mixture on my car the way I could have in my '67 Chevy. But I'm sorry.
But-
I'd rather have a 2010
returned-
Toyota Prius because it's freaking reliable.
Your car is not the same as a personal
It
information
absolutely
device.
is. My iPad has electric
not.
fuel injection. I can't change the fuel air
I mean,
mixture on it. I can't.
don't
get it
argue with
to
Robert
around
about
the
this.
way I could on a-
Robert's car
now
is a
even-
big
and you've left
computer.
it to
That's
a
all it
priesthood
is.
to now fix it. That's not what we want.
Absolutely. I have to go to a Toyota dealership to change my fuel air mixture if it's wrong.
Robert
Come
doesn't
on.
even drive. If you've ever been in the car with him, the car drives, and Robert, overrules
Absolutely.
it if he thinks something's wrong.
Absolutely. I want a new world where I don't have to do anything.
You're equating a computer, equating an information device with a car. I think is a dramatically wrong idea. This is not what these things are.
Okay.
Let's argue about it offline.
A car is an information.
For those who are playing
The car
the
contains a lot of information devices. It is.
for those playing the drinking game, that is close to we'll have to agree to disagree. So there have been 2 of them so far. All right. Well, I can see that I can't really change the subject, so I'm not going to try again. Any last thoughts? Let's go around the table, starting with Kevin.
I think that the openness closeness debate is going to continue, but I think that the generativity of actual open specifications, open source stuff, is so much greater than the closed stuff that and Apple realizes this that they can't do all that stuff too. That for me, that's the good sign. Despite Steve saying we'll kill what we like, actually they can't afford to ignore the open standards of the web. Even if they build a demo site for HTML5 that restricts you to their own browser.
Yeah,
This-
even
this the point
even though they
badly?
contributed how much to the building of WebKit? I mean, come on, give me a
Of course,
break.
that's what I'm saying. They've contributed a huge amount there. But the difference between
I mean,
that
what did
is
all
that
this
that's
stuff
open
that
source.
Chris Messina did as an open guy before he went to the new Borg? I mean,
Yeah, of course.
where do we start?
That's my point. You're making my point. My point is the stuff that is open is a safe thing to build on because it can't be killed by one company.
Okay, Robert.
I want a world where we're all public. I'm putting my credit card in a Blippy. I'm on Facebook. I have everything set to all public. I want Foursquare to hook up to TripIt to my Google Calendar and have it more and more public. The advantage of going into that world is you get a lot of stuff in return, and that's what we haven't been discussing is what happens when you do join into a world that's more public like that.
Well, I'm in favor. Can I use your credit card since you're going to open it up?
No.
Oh, I thought that was
the bank
another
doesn't
one of
take
these
it with
free
your-
deals that you make it up on eyeballs later, right? Chris?
Well, I guess the thing that's important to me, and I think Kevin touched on this a little bit, is just that the open stuff for me is less interesting when you're just talking about it from an open perspective, and more interesting when you're talking about it from either a capabilities or an interoperability story. So all the stuff that Robert's talking about and all the benefits that you might gain from having a real kind of data interoperability only comes once you get people to agree to basically speak the same language through their APIs and protocols. So we have to sort of demonstrate not only that there's an interesting market for that, but that there are more and more interesting applications that we're not currently able to build because we're stuck with a lot of technology that was developed in an era that was before a lot of really smart, small devices that people are carrying around with them constantly without the type of geolocative data that we have now. In this era of computing, most people, I hate to say most people, but there are a lot of people who have friends who are also online and they have a reason to go online on a regular basis, and that wasn't true just a couple years ago. So the only way that we're actually going to show the benefits and the values of new types of applications is through driving more standardization of a number of these things. I think actually Apple's work with WebKit's great, but I hope that it's the kind of work that actually inspires a lot of different types of competition as opposed to experiences that must be experienced through the Safari browser.
Dan?
Basically what they said, except for Robert. I'm the world that I think we need to be working toward in general is one with as few choke points as possible, where single entities can cut off or severely constrict pretty much anything, and where there's many different pathways to get to destinations that we want to get to. And beyond that, open certainly is part of that, but I think we have a lot to think about in that category in a lot of different parts of what we do, and not just information technology.
Okay, so I think we've figured everything out now.
Until next week.
This is Steve Gillmor. This has been the Gillmor Gang. I want to thank Rackspace, and particularly Rob Legess, without whom this show would not be back on the air. I'd like to thank the fabulous folks at NewTek and their TriCaster, without which this wouldn't be on video. And I'd like to thank our producer and director, Tina Chase, and our technical genius advisor, Cliff Garish. And I want to thank everybody who showed up, and especially those who didn't. We'll see you again next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.